elite recipe source, a jack of all trades, and a master of one. I'm also a pretty good cook, too. ERS getting hot and heavy in the kitchen again, doing gnocchi here for video number 6 from the channel. There are tons of gnocchi recipe videos out there, and my idea for making this one is that it's going to be more about the overall technique and general principles in making a good gnocchi and less about the exact measurements. I'll have a regular style recipe with measurements and procedures and all that in the description, but my goal here is that you can get enough of an understanding of the general principles from watching this video that you'll be able to make gnocchi without having to refer back to a written recipe. But before I get into the procedure for making a good gnocchi, let's talk about what a good gnocchi is. A good gnocchi is basically an inflated, puffy version of a good pasta. It's not too tough and it's not too mushy. When you bite into it, it gives just the right level of resistance. Gnocchi is basically a handmade pasta, eggs and flour, that has potato added to that dough. What the potato does, from my experience, is that it acts as an overcooking insurance for the pasta. I've experimented with different cook times for potato gnocchi, and I've even had one stick to the bottom of the pot so it got boiled for like 20 minutes as I did several batches of gnocchi, and I only noticed it when I poured the water out of the pot after the meal was complete. And so that gnocchi had been in there a while and it still had a pretty decent texture. And so if the potato acts as an overcooking insurance, the ricotta acts as an over kneading insurance. If you knead a potato, egg, flour only gnocchi dough too much, it's going to get too tough. So the ricotta is there. It's almost like a cheat. You don't have to be very skilled and have just the right kind of delicate touch when you're mixing and kneading your gnocchi dough together. You can mix and knead it pretty much as you want and keep adding flour as needed to get the dough looking and feeling like something you can roll and shape. That is a kind of like a Play-Doh consistency is what you're going for. It's going to be dry enough to not stick to your hands, but it still has a little bit of a grip to it so that it can be rolled on a surface like your counter or a fork without wanting to just slide off instead of roll like it's supposed to. So for the gnocchi dough, the flour and the eggs are already there in the kitchen, ready for use. The other two ingredients though, the ricotta and the potatoes, we're gonna need to do some initial prep work for. The potatoes, they need to be peeled, chopped, and gently boiled the same way you would do for mashed potatoes. You start the chopped potatoes in cold water, then you cook them until they're soft all the way through, then you drain them until they're as dry as possible. But you already know that. What a lot of y'all may not know is how easy it is to make ricotta cheese at home without necessarily needing any special ingredients or tools. If you do have things like citric acid or cheesecloth, or a double boiler, it gives you more options, but these things aren't absolutely necessary. If you've got milk, vinegar, a thermometer, a couple of pots, and some kind of a strainer or even a slotted spoon, you have what it takes to make ricotta. I'm using powdered citric acid here, dissolved in about a tablespoon of white vinegar, and the ratio I go with is 1 teaspoon of citric acid to a gallon of milk, plus a little vinegar to dissolve that powder in, or just dissolve it in water if you don't have vinegar. And if you have vinegar but don't have citric acid, just use more vinegar. I would go with, in that case, a ratio of having 1 whole cup of vinegar ready to add for 1 full gallon of milk. Now, you may not need to add that whole cup of vinegar. You're just going to see what's necessary to separate the curds from the whey, and I'll get to that part in a minute. So we've got a container of our acidic mix standing by. Now we start heating up the milk. Now I use a double boiler. It makes it a little safer to avoid possibly getting some milk burned on the bottom, but you can replicate that with a couple of pans or pots that are roughly the same size, or you just be very careful with the heat. You want to take the milk up to about 190 degrees, and that's where the milk starts to steam just a little bit. That's the temperature we're looking for. Then you want to add enough of your acid to get the ricotta cheese to form. You want to get the milk to curdle you want to get the milk to clump up like this. And what you're going for is kind of a cloudier version of Gatorade looking whey. The liquid is going to be kind of cloudy and a little bit of a yellowish color to it. But this is the end goal that we're going for. And the more acid you use and the hotter you take it, you could take it up to 195 degrees. The more acid and the hotter you take it, the easier it's going to be to clump together, and the drier and harder of a ricotta cheese you have. If you're going for a creamier, more liquidy ricotta cheese, then you want to go with the heat a little bit lower, and you don't want to go as hard with putting the acid in there. And I've got the exact measurements for what I use, but you want to use enough heat and enough acid to get this kind of separation of the curds and the whey going right here. Then it's just a matter of taking the curds out and straining them. Again, a more creamy ricotta cheese, you might need a cheesecloth to get all the bits through. But what I did here was an easier version of doing ricotta, which is where I'm erring on the side of using more acid and more heat to make it harder and easier to work with. And so it's just a matter of taking those clumps out and straining them and getting them dry. And then you've got your ricotta cheese. Now this, in my opinion, is one of those things, one of those kind of foods. It's like trying real maple syrup for the first time as opposed to the imitation stuff. Once you make a homemade ricotta cheese, you'll want to keep doing it, and you'll notice a difference. It's going to be better than the store-bought stuff, and it's going to be kind of a letdown if you go back to using the store-bought stuff. You'll kind of spoil yourself by making it like this. So this is the way I do any ricotta cheese. What I've got here, I'm going about half gallon of milk and a half teaspoon of citric acid. So the ratio of, if you're using the dry citric acid, is going to be 1 teaspoon to 1 gallon of milk. I'll usually only do at a minimum a half gallon at a time. And the yield I got from that is with a harder, drier ricotta compressed down into a smaller volume. That is, I got about a cup of ricotta cheese from the half gallon of milk. Now, because this is a very dry ricotta, I'm going to work out the clumps as much as I can. Here I am adding that Parmesan cheese, and I'm adding some eggs and working this together as much as I can to try to get these lumps out before the egg and cheese mixture meets the potato and the flour to make the dough. So right here, I'm mixing in enough eggs to get the ricotta from a lumpy, almost crumbly cheese kind of texture into a creamy cheese plus eggs kind of mixture. Remember, this is going to get mixed with potato and flour in order to eventually make a Play-Doh. And before I forget to say it, I'm adding salt here as needed, if needed, and that goes as well for the potatoes. Taste your food as you're making it for this one here. So the potatoes have been cooked to soft, drained completely. They're as dry as possible and fairly cooled down. Now I'm going to transfer them into the main mixing bowl and break them up very finely. Ideally, this is done with a potato ricer or a food mill. But if you don't have one, you can improvise with a fork or a whisk or one of these strainer spider things. But I've got a ricer, kind of like an oversized garlic press thing, so I'm going to use that. The idea is to get the potatoes broken up as fine as possible so you don't have lumps. And so once the potatoes are broken down, it's time to use this stuff as a pasta dough ingredient. In a regular pasta dough, you've mainly just got eggs as your wet ingredient and flour as your dry ingredient. And it's just a matter of balancing the wet and the dry to get a mass of workable dough. With the gnocchi, it's the same kind of deal, only instead of just eggs as the wet and flour as the dry, you've got the potato and the ricotta as well in there in between, kind of wet and kind of dry. If you recall from a couple minutes ago, I'd put 3 eggs into the ricotta mix, and here I'm putting 2 more into the main bowl with my potato and the ricotta egg mix, so there's a total of 5 eggs. And there are also a total of 5 regular-sized russet potatoes. So I can provide some rules of thumb on the ratios. We got 1 potato per person or per serving. We got 1 egg per potato. And we got about as much ricotta by volume as the egg. And we got almost as much by volume of grated parmesan, which is optional and which is kind of to taste. And of course, whatever volume of the fluffy grated parmesan there is, it's going to be a lot less by weight than the compressed ricotta or any of the other ingredients. Anyway, of course, as you can see, I'm not even measuring the flour here. I'm just gradually mixing it in and making several flour additions in the bowl, as well as once I get it into a mass on the counter, and I can keep making little flour additions here and there and keep mixing it and kneading it. And I even forgot to add pepper earlier when it was back in the bowl. That's when I should have added it. Poor form, yes, most definitely, but is it a deal breaker at this point? Fortunately not, because I've got that over kneading insurance, that ricotta in the dough, so it's not a problem. I can just add my pepper to the dough right here and just knead it in to distribute it evenly. Once I can get the dough into a ball that isn't sticking to my fingers too badly, I'm going to let it rest for about 20 minutes, which is standard procedure for any pasta dough. Then I'm going to get it ready to be rolled. I'm breaking off a piece of it and rolling it into a snake. I'm putting my hands in the center and rolling outward a little as I roll forward. You're going for as even of a width as you can, and this snake is what I'm going to use to cut the individual gnocchis from. I'm keeping flour on hand here for the whole process. My gnocchi dough is at the point now where it's not sticking to my hands, but it is gripping the surface of the counter just enough. But whenever I cut into it, the exposed cut part is going to be a little wetter and just wet enough to be annoying. So I'm putting more flour around wherever I'm cutting it. And so I'm cutting the snake into pieces that are going to be the individual gnocchis. When you do this, you got to be mindful that those cut sides are going to be sticky, and the gnocchis can stick together at this point, especially if 2 of those wetter exposed cut sides touch. So there is a little bit of a technique to cutting these, but nothing that takes any special skill or finesse. You just got to put some kind of forward or side motion after you cut through to flick the gnocchi just far enough so it's not right up there against the rest of the snake. If you do notice a couple sticking together, just get them apart as soon as you see it happening. Once you get a snake cut into individual gnocchis, you want to throw a pinch of flour down and toss them in it with a bench scraper, trying to get some flour on those stickier, wetter cut sides. Then I'll remove it to a sheet pan that also has flour on it and repeat the process until the dough is rolled into snakes and then cut down into pieces. Once I fill up a sheet pan, I like to put it in the fridge or even a freezer if I've got the space to do so. This is so I can let them firm up a little in the cold, as well as absorb all the flour that's been sprinkled onto them. So once these little pillows have cooled down a little and dried out a little, now is the time to start rolling each one from that pillow shape into a C shape with ridges so that they'll have more surface area and a better mouthfeel. This can be done on a fork, but it's a lot easier on a wooden gnocchi board because the board will grip better and it's longer, giving you more room to roll on. I'm going to demonstrate both methods, starting with the fork. What I'm doing is 2 steps. First, I'm going to press it down into the fork to flatten it a little. Second, I'm going to roll it along the fork into a C shape in as smooth a motion as possible. Ideally, the little track marks that you make when you press it in step 1 will line up with the same grooves as when you roll it into the C shape in step 2. Unfortunately, I can't do this slowly to demonstrate, so I'll try to do so with some slow motion. This is one of those things that is going to be easier the quicker you do it and the less you think about it. If you try to do it in individual steps and think, oh, here I'm doing step one, here I'm doing step two, if you stop and think about it, it's not going to work. The quicker you go with it, the easier it's going to be. And with a wooden gnocchi board, there's more room, better grooves, better grip with the wood surface, so it's easier. Not all my gnocchi ended up in the ideal C shape or with the grooves that lined up, and I think the pressing down and the curving into the C shape is the most important part of this for getting a better shape and more surface area. And again, like I said, this step is easier to do quickly without thinking about it too much. Just try a few times until you get it right, and then shoot for repeating what you did the time that you got it right as best you can. This is a task I find easiest to do while I've got the TV on or some YouTube video going on in the background. This part in the process of making gnocchi or any kind of pasta in general is going to be labor intensive and time consuming, but if you compare your homemade gnocchi to a store-bought version, you're not going to even see the point of the store-bought stuff. And if you compare your homemade stuff to the restaurant gnocchi, you can pat yourself on the back for being able to make a gnocchi as good as the restaurants do. But we're not just done yet. Once you have the gnocchi rolled into the rigid C shape, you can freeze them like this in a tray or cook them right away in boiling water. You want to cook them until they float and then some. Remember, this is pasta with potato as the overcooking insurance. So what I do here is I wait until all of the batch of gnocchi in the pot have floated to the surface, then count at least a minute more before starting to take them out. It is said that they're done once they float, but I've found that letting them cook a minute more after floating will get a texture with a better bite to it, more like an al dente pasta. Now, there are a lot of restaurant-style gnocchi recipes that will say to saute the already cooked gnocchi in a pan at this point, but I've experimented with doing that and found it doesn't really do anything to improve the texture, so I think that's a step that can be skipped. Also, I've seen where a lot of recipes for ricotta and potato gnocchi and a lot of ricotta cheese involved recipes in general will talk about having a hint of nutmeg, like as in so little nutmeg that you can't even taste the nutmeg, but it has some kind of effect on the flavor of the cheese. My experience has been that you either taste the nutmeg or you don't. So if you don't want to taste nutmeg, then don't add it to your cheese. I didn't want to taste nutmeg in my potato ricotta gnocchi, so I didn't use any. Anyway, I'll usually serve my gnocchi with a slow-cooked meat and tomato sauce with plenty of wine in it, and maybe I'll do a sauce recipe here in the channel in the near future. It would have to be easier than this video, which was like the hardest one to edit together, trying to cut here and there to have the words match what's going on the screen and having the music come in at just the right time. But anyway, I hope you got some gnocchi knowledge here, and if you liked what you saw, hit the like and subscribe button and check out the other videos on the channel.